Good morning, good evening, and a very warm welcome to everyone joining us for today's webinar, Rethinking Nutrition and Food Systems for Planetary Health in South Asia, organized jointly by the Lakshmi Mittal and Family South Asia Institute at Harvard University and the Harvard T.H. Chan School of Public Health India Research Center. I am Angarika Datta, Communications and Outreach Manager at the Mittal Institute's India office. The Mittal Institute works closely with faculty, students, and regional partners to deepen understanding of the most pressing issues shaping India and the wider region. In a sense, the Institute's mission is to connect Harvard University to India and South Asia. Our work spans the arts, humanities, health, and sciences, with a growing focus on climate change. We convened India 2047, a large gathering on climate change under the title of Building a Climate Resilient Future. It was a dialogue that brought together leaders in climate science, health, labor, business, and urban planning. The idea is to chart a path towards a sustainable and equitable future for the region as well as the world. Food systems and nutrition lie at the heart of this. As South Asia undergoes a rapid nutrition transition marked by undernutrition alongside rising rates of diabetes, cardiovascular diseases, and obesity, the links between climate, diets, and health are becoming increasingly clear. In this context, planetary health diets offer an important framework for advancing both human well being and environmental sustainability. Today's discussion brings these themes together, and before I hand it over to our moderator for this session, Professor S.V. Subramanian, I'd like to introduce him. S.V. Subramanian is a professor of population health and geography at Harvard University and faculty chair of the Center for Geographic Analysis. He is principal investigator of the Geographic Insights Lab at the Harvard Center for Population and Development Studies and primary faculty at the Harvard T.H. Chan School of Public Health. A founding director of Harvard's PhD program in population health sciences, he has published over 900 scholarly works on population health and multi-level methods. His research focuses on data science for precision public policy and understanding health inequalities. A highly certified researcher since 2015, he has taught multi-level methods at Harvard since 2001 and mentored over 185 students. He has held senior editorial roles at Social Science and Medicine and SSM Population Health. He has also been an editorial consultant to The Lancet and served on the International Advisory Board for The Lancet Global Health. Professor Subramanian, it is a pleasure and an honor to have you with us. Over to you now.
Yeah, thank you so much, Garika, for that very kind introduction. Thank you, everyone. First of all, let me, thank all the participants for both in the US for waking up early and joining this session, which I am very excited to learn since we have such a distinguished panel today morning. And also, I want to welcome all our colleagues in India and friends who are joining clearly outside of office hours. So we will make this worth your while. So thank you so much for taking the time to participate in this. But mostly, I'm really honored and privileged to have been asked to moderate such a distinguished panel here, and I will give the introductions to the three people who probably don't need much introduction if you are even remotely related to this topic of public health and nutrition, and more broadly, including now environmental health. So let me sort of add a little bit of context as a social scientist doing public health to what Angarika just gave as a broad framing. Just like some few factoids, as Angarika mentioned, this is co-hosted with the the Mittal South Asia Institute and the Harvard IRC of the HSPH. South Asia is home to 2 billion people. That's 25% of humanity. This is not including China, by the way. Okay, so this is excluding China. So if we include as Asia, then we are practically looking at about half of the humanity. Number one. Number two, when it comes to South Asia, These are not small countries in terms of area wise, but they are not large either. Because if you compare like in the other largest country, which would be China, the area wise, China is much bigger than India. As similarly, the second or third countries in South Asia, whether it's Pakistan or Bangladesh, I don't know which way, what's the ranking. Comparable populations would be to Russia, perhaps, or not US quite, but again, very large landmass. And so the key point besides population is also population density, very dense areas. I mean, any of you who have traveled in India, you can go all the way up to Ladakh, and you will all of a sudden still see some hutments on your way up. Number three, geographically and from a kind of climatology perspective, largely semi-arid conditions. These are not like highly like water rich. Only 4% of the water resources in South Asia is fresh water. The rest is all groundwater. Uh, so this is a context. I was reading somewhere that South Asia is classified as like a kind of whatever a region of severe water scarcity. We can all debate how they do these cutoffs, but the broad point being, it is not very abundant for one of the key resource that matters both for human health as well as for growing food. So I think this is a sort of a big issue that I feel, which is part of the larger climate issue. And I'm not even invoking what's to come, but these are the facts, no matter what. And whether the impact on human health or agriculture or other industrial uses. Number four, farming in these countries, even though it's a very primary occupation and farming being related to food, it's highly fragmented, very fragmented. So these are like where, the farming operations by and large, 60% in India rely on of the populations are in agriculture related occupations. And so they are not in holdings of the size that we see in Ukraine or US or elsewhere. So these are very fragmented in the way the agriculture is practiced. What does that mean? That has a huge impact on agriculture productivity. So how much we can grow crops per hectare or acre is not very optimal. And at least since the Green Revolution, which happened 30, 40, 50 years ago now, I guess, or more, at least my reading, consumption of this literature is that crop productivity has been stagnating. So we need to find some way because we can't eat into more land. Number one, there are competing, but at the same time, we have to increase. And, last but not the least, these countries are not even close to anywhere near the potentials of full economic development. So if these were to progress even at the rate at which, say, India is progressing right now, we are looking at a hugely high demand coming in, whether it is basic things or otherwise. And as we know, as economic development happens, it's not just the need for food. People want food, and people want food of different types. So this is all kind of it's not like it's an institutional way we just feed everybody X amount of calories and say, okay, there you go. But people want different types of food. They want to try it because you have their disposable income now to do these things. So that's a sort of a context I just want to give from a social science perspective. You will obviously all hear a lot from the nutrition and public health perspective, but this is the kind of the context within which I think today's session becomes, at least to me, kind of urgent. I think as many times as we can do this, I still feel it's less because we learned something and it is important to communicate. So it is with this backdrop that it is really my honor and privilege to have this highly distinguished panel of scholars and policy researcher. Here we have Dr. Purnima Menon, and what perspectives they can offer, I think, to the basic challenge of how do we provide food in a sustainable way for expanding outside of South Asia, 10 billion people. Both in terms of that also accommodates people taste and preferences, and what can science tell us. And I think this is where the richness of this panel comes in. At least one of the distinguished panelists here, speaker Professor Willett, has, I don't know, more than 50 years of experience, if not more, of working in this area, if not having created this area. So the format Angarika has already presented. I think each of the panelists will talk about for 15 to 20 minutes, and then we'll have a couple of rounds of questions, and then we'll open it up. We do want to hear from you, so please keep posting your questions. Let me, with this, perhaps invite first Professor Walter Willett from the Harvard School of Public Health. Dr. Willett is a physician and an epidemiologist and is a professor of epidemiology and nutrition at the Harvard T.H. Chan School of Public Health. He has been chair of the Department of Nutrition, one of the leading departments across the world at Harvard for 25 years. And like when I came to Harvard 25 years ago, this was my, what I've learned from Dr. Willett and his broad contributions from the department that came about. One of the key things was he was the pioneer in establishing cohort studies also with regards to if we really want to focus on how diet can shape health, then we want to know what people are eating. And establishing that within the context of a cohort study to really start unpacking and learning both about food consumption patterns as well as its impact. I don't think there is anyone else. And it was like hugely novel at that point and continues to be. And I really congratulate Dr. Willett and his team for having sustained this over such a period of time, despite many challenges that came about, including now. Um, and this is just like, I'm just highlighting one aspect of this really kind of key. If you want to know more, Dr. Willett has published more than 2,000 papers in the broad field of diet and how it impacts health, and not just health, also various types of diseases. He has written the key textbook, in my mind, the Bible of nutrition, which is the Nutrition Epidemiology, published by Oxford University Press, and has a number of books, also more for the general lay public. Dr. Willett has been for the longest time has been the most cited, has been in the list of the highly cited researchers, as you can imagine, and it is also a member of the National Academy of Sciences, Academy of Sciences in the U.S. of Medicine, and of course a recipient of multiple honors and awards. I would just add to that one more thing, which I feel Dr. Willett's huge contribution is, I think if you come across any nutritional researcher, certainly epidemiologist, their lives would have been touched by Walter Willett directly or indirectly. Practically everyone, a lot of my colleagues and friends whom I know have been mentored or directly or indirectly by Dr. Willett. So I'm going to invite Dr. Willett to share his remarks on this topic to get us started. Thank you so much.
Yes, well, thank you, Subbu, for that kind introduction, and privileged to be on this panel, which is specifically addressing some of the challenges in India and Southeast Asia more directly. In fact, although my studies have been primarily based in the US, I really got interested in nutrition when I was 10 years old, when PhD student Saranya Reddy was more or less joined our family in Madison, Wisconsin, while she was doing her work there. And I've been able to visit India many times and be an advisor to the Ministry of Health there. So I've learned a lot. But as I think everyone knows, India is so complex. I only know a little bit about India, and I'm grateful to be able to still learn more. I was asked to talk about the Eat Lancet Commission, and I'll describe that very briefly before coming to the specific question that was asked of us, what's the single most important takeaway from this. The Eat Lancet Commission was started in about 2015 and was given the challenge to find a way to feed the world a diet that is both healthy and sustainable. I was privileged to be a co-chair of that commission. We published our first report in 2019, and we published our second report in 2025, just a few months ago in October. In 2025, we added another component besides being healthy and sustainable, but also just. And that was a new section. And I think we looked in a cutting edge way, thanks to some of our panel members at that issue. We were very privileged to have India well represented on our panel of 35 scientists, including Nitya Rao, Nita Faruhi, based in UK now, Ramanand Laksamarian, and from the very beginning as an advisor or panel member, Srinath Reddy, who turned out to be, interestingly, a close family member of the Reddy family, who got me started when I was 10 years old in this area of research, including India. So the challenge obviously was huge. We're at this point very off track in terms of where we're headed from a climate change standpoint and from a health standpoint. And that's why we're here today. So I don't need to go into the rationale and evidence on that. But when we're asked to describe a pathway for providing a healthy and sustainable diet, it's so complicated, but we decided to start with defining a healthy diet quantitatively, because we generally have agreement that people should have a healthy diet. So we spent about 3 years reviewing the literature and came up with what we called a planetary health diet. I don't have time now to go into the evidence and the details. It is complex, but very broadly, the diet could be called a flexitarian, plant-forward diet that could include being a vegan, could be an omnivore, and everything else in between. But in terms of animal-sourced foods being quite modest, or putting together all the numbers, it came down to something pretty simple for our omnivore version of this, which is 1 + 1. Meaning about 1 serving of dairy a day and 1 serving of another animal source protein per day, with red meat being kept quite low because of its strong adverse health impacts, as well as large impacts environmentally. We were able to estimate in this publication how much premature mortality among adults we could avoid if, in principle, if the world adopted this dietary pattern, and that amounted to about 27% of premature deaths, so a very large percent of overall mortality, coming out to be about 15 million deaths per year, potentially avoidable. But we have a long way to go to get to that pattern of this healthy and sustainable diet. The second step was to do an environmental review of, again, where we are, where we're headed, and what could be possible with shifts in food, shifts in the way we produce food. In other words, reduction of improved agricultural methods, and also the third pillar, reductions in food loss and waste. In other words, change in diet, reduction of food loss and waste, and improvements in agricultural methods. Our analysis showed that if we did all 3 of those shifts appropriately, we could feed the world a healthy and sustainable diet. I didn't I wasn't really sure if that was even possible when we started this process, because again, we're far away from where we should be, but it is possible, but there's not a lot of wiggle room there. We really do need to have all of these areas, all of the sectors, from education to agriculture to economics, be engaged in this process, and many other sectors too. Uh, Interestingly, we could actually reduce land use by feeding the world this healthy, sustainable dietary pattern that mainly comes from shifting production and use of grains to be consumed directly by humans, and not just grains, soy products, but those are really the two big uh, aspects of products of agriculture are grains and soybeans, it turns out, on a global basis. If we ate more of that directly as humans rather than feeding animals and then eating the animals, that gain in efficiency would allow us to stop cutting down trees in the Amazon and uh, recover some of the land for purposes of carbon capture, other purposes, rather than growing crops to feed animals. So that is really sort of the biggest, very broad picture. We did country-specific analyses in this, and they're actually available online in an interactive way. So if you go to the EAT website, that you'll have access to that interactive uh, data that can look at specific countries in terms of food production uh, and environmental impacts, and change pieces of that picture and look at the consequences. Uh, in terms of India, I think, Subra, you really highlighted the challenges, and India is really where sort of the cutting edge of where environmental change and climate and health are coming together. And it would, in terms of what we saw in India, and I don't remember all the details, but they're shifting to a healthier diet would actually increase water use because it would mean more production of vegetables, which are rather water intensive. So not a huge increase, but it wasn't going to be a decrease. And I should mention, these are projections out to 2050. That was our milestone time there. So efficient use of water is going to be a really critical issue globally, but India is one of the most directly critical areas. Just a quick mention of the justice section. That Nitya Rao was very helpful in and providing new metrics and insight in that chapter. Christina Hicks from the UK, originally from Kenya, was also a key there. And that did, I think, as everyone is aware, there are huge justice issues on a global basis. Essentially, US and Europe created the climate change crisis, but the rest of the world is bearing the consequences of that. So there's that was through the use of fossil fuel, but that same injustice occurs on the diet side too, that we are the big consumers of animal source foods, and particularly red meat, although China is catching up very quickly and passing us on a per capita basis. But globally, there's huge injustice, but also within countries, I think everyone awares that there's major injustice in terms of distribution of resources and consumption, but also across countries, but within countries as well. And lack of voice for decision making is another aspect of justice that was highlighted there. So that was, I think, really cutting edge work in that new chapter. In terms of what's different from our previous report in 2019, I think the highlight would be urgency, because the global shifts that are driving climate change and environmental degradation are accelerating. They're not linear, and we're entering vicious circles or tipping points. And I think that was a sense of the committee this time, that these changes are going to be substantial, and we can't just wait. We have to be working on them today. So thanks, and I look forward to further discussion.
Yeah, thank you so much, Walter. I think we will go through and hear all the remarks and the comments from the panelists before we have a round of exchange. So let me at this point, I think since invite Dr. Shilpa Bhupati Raju to sort of share her remarks, and the order here is partly as Dr. Willett has laid down this broad framework of this EAT, the Lancet Commission, that two of the Lancet Commissions now are related to that topic. And Yuvika, thanks Yuvika for putting that link for those of you who are not. I'll try to bring out more in the Q&A or question answers with Dr. Willett to explain a little bit more on the evolution from 2019 to just elaborate a little bit more for those of you who are not aware. But let me right now just introduce Dr. Bhupati Raju, who is an assistant professor of medicine at the Harvard Medical School and an assistant professor of nutrition at the Harvard T.H. Chan School of Public Health. She's also an associate epidemiologist at the Brigham and Women's Hospital in Boston. Dr. Bhupati Raju is a nutritional epidemiologist, and her research focuses on diet and lifestyle influences of cardiometabolic diseases, and particularly amongst high-risk groups such as the Hispanics and South Asians. She leverages some of the latest omics related tools, including proteomics and metabolomics, to uncover the mechanisms. I think this is a really key aspect that I think we do need to understand if we need to create different types of food. I don't know from the standpoint of overall production, just understanding those mechanisms and identifying dietary and metabolic biomarkers to sort of see how we can influence them through changes in diet. She's also currently a PI and leading several clinical trials in India. So I really welcome here Shilpa to build on what Dr. Willett just laid out at a very high global level, and of course with lots of work in the US on how you have been thinking about this as it relates to South Asia and particularly the populations in South Asia or abroad.
Thanks, Subbu, and just want to say it's been a real honor to serve on this panel alongside Walter and Purnima. And I think, Subbu, you've been absolutely right. Anyone in nutrition has been touched in some way or the other by Walter. And the question I've been asked is, what do the planetary health aligned diets mean for cardiometabolic risk in South Asians? And what does this really mean for India and for other LMICs? So I've done some work with the MASALA study, which, MASALA stands for Mediators of Atherosclerosis among South Asians living in America. So it's a two-site study in California and Chicago. And while we welcome more data from South Asia specifically, I think the evidence from MASALA and other related cohorts is very consistent. And the message is that diet quality matters enormously for cardiometabolic risk among South Asians. And what we find is that the patterns that are healthiest for cardiometabolic health also look strikingly similar to planetary health aligned diets. In Masala, we found that people who were consuming more plant forward patterns, more whole grains, legumes, vegetables, fruits, and nuts with limited refined grains, limited added sugars, and red and processed meats, they had a lower risk of insulin resistance, less visceral adiposity, less pericardial fat, and lower incidence of type 2 diabetes and cardiovascular disease. And what we've shown is that even within vegetarian diets, the quality matters. And I think this is especially important for India, where people say, well, I'm a vegetarian, so I'm healthy, but the quality really matters. And so a diet that's rich in refined carbs, which is unfortunately what a majority of the nation is consuming, and something that's fried snacks is not protective, so as a diet that's based on minimally processed plant foods. We recently published a paper in Nature Medicine along with our collaborators in Chennai, the Madras Diabetes Research Foundation, where we leveraged the nationally representative ICMR in DIAP study. And we showed that the country as a whole is consuming high amounts of refined carbs, more than 62%, with very low protein intake, especially plant protein. And so this combination is actually very concerning in a population that's has an underlying susceptibility to, insulin resistance, a very high prevalence of prediabetes and type 2 diabetes. And what it suggests is that it's important to improve the macronutrient balance, especially by increasing affordable, high quality protein, plant protein specifically, and reducing excess refined carbs, which is really central to reducing cardiometabolic risk. Now, what this might mean for India and other LMICs is that one, there are traditional elements of the Indian diet, such as millets, pulses, and vegetables that Walter was alluding to. They're real national assets, right? They improve diet quality, they provide better protein, something that's lacking in Indian diets, fiber, and they align really well with the planetary health principles. The challenge is we need to scale them instead of allowing them to be displaced by ultra processed foods, which is what we see on the shelves of the Indian market. You go to any grocery store in India, you have millet based foods, but they're highly refined and highly processed. And another thing that I'd really like to highlight within the planetary healthy diet is the issue surrounding dairy. Now, dairy is very central to Indian diets, and it's often viewed as inherently healthy. And I think, Walter's, the Eat Lancet recommendations has a place for dairy, but moderate dairy intake can very well fit within to planetary health. But very high intakes, what, people are consuming right now in India, especially when coupled with the high use of ghee, paneer, and other dairy-based sweets, can actually contribute to excess amounts of saturated fat and added sugar. So I think the key takeaways from both the masala studies and the ICMR and DIAB data is that we should focus really on improving the quality and balance of the entire dietary pattern rather than relying really on simple distinctions as vegetarian versus non-vegetarian. And this really opens the door to policies that, address both NCDs and sustainability through the same lens.
Thank you so much, Shilpa, for those remarks, building on Walter's broad opening to that. Let me now give the floor to, so to speak, to Purnima Menon, Dr. Purnima Menon. Dr. Menon is a senior director at the International Food Policy Research Institute. Did I get that right, Purnima? Yes,
Yes,
which is,
thank you,
of course,
Subbu.
again, of course, if you are working in this again area, you can't miss their contribution, first of all, to sort of more applied and policy-focused research, as well as a lot of sort of much more targeted what kind of interventions have worked, undertaking large trials. Just as an institute, they are amongst the leading research institutes alongside other universities, making contributions in this area. And so I welcome Dr. Menon, and of course, Dr. Menon currently oversees the IFPRI's, which is the acronym, global research on transforming food systems and using those systems for, precisely the kinds of question we are raising here. How do we get to a point where the sustainably as well as in a more healthy way, we can provide for the population this basic need of food. Our own research has focused on data-driven kind of policy solutions, as well as undertaking large-scale evaluations on various aspects of nutrition and public health. and how it impacts health outcomes and so on. By and large, most of the large-scale programs that I know in India that are going on, or even in Asian region, at least to my recollection from a few years ago, it had Dr. Purnima Menon had something to do with it, either directly or indirectly. So thank you so much, Purnima. And I don't think there is anyone better equipped at this point because, again, since I've known Purnima for a very long time, she truly traverses multiple worlds. From our world of researchers that we see to the policy world. I've seen her toil away at multiple corridors of ministries in India. Not terribly pleasant sometimes. You just have to wait in that sense. It's pleasant enough, but it's just waiting. But her patience and her ability to sort of just keep at it is something like truly inspiring in that regard. So congratulations on that. And then she continues to do this now globally. So my best wishes, Purnima. Again, yeah, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Subbu, and really thank you to both the Mittal Institute and the Harvard School of Public Health. It's an honor to be here. And when I was invited, I was like, well, Walter speaking and Shilpa speaking, I don't know what I have to add in this mix. But having heard the two of you, and I think taking seriously the sense that our science has to reach decision makers in many different parts of many different systems to really transform lives for the better. I hope that what I have to add here is complementary to some of what you all have outlined as some of the challenges that we need to solve. So one of the things we do at IFPRI is pull together every year an annual flagship report that sort of brings together research from across our ecosystem and that of our partners. And I want to start with not this past year's Global Food Policy Report, which is what we call it, which sort of summarized 50 years of IFPRI research, but to go a year before that, where with Deanna Olney, I had the honor of bringing together our flagship report on food systems for healthy diets. And, for us, it was a real opportunity to bring together insights from across our own institute on this work and think about, well, what does this mean for what people need to do looking forward? And much of what you'll see there is really well aligned with, what we have seen in Eat Lancet 2025, which, I think was a really masterful, Walter, congratulations to you and everyone else who just brought together such an incredible and wide-ranging perspective. When I look at that, though, I'm always, thinking, well, who needs to do what next to actually make the change we want to see? And so I think this is where, we want to try and bring together the science with, policy recommendations, but also walking together with policymakers and decision makers who are trying to make change at many different levels, right? So that's a little bit of what I think about our work and our sort of abilities is to be able to do that walk along with people. So one of the things we did in the Global Food Policy Report in 2024 was sort of lay out the challenges to sustainable healthy diets. And we sort of bucketed these in four with a fifth underpinning, which is that we really need to think about what drives people to do what they do, and then try to hit at all those different drivers with the tools that we may have, right? And this relates to what drives, what's happening around desirability, as we called it, around food. Why is it that people make the choices they make? What is the role that affordability has to play in all of this? And for South Asia, it's a pretty big challenge. I'll come to that in a moment. What should we do about accessibility and actually getting healthy foods closer to people? And then, of course, what do you do in production systems? And I really, when we say production systems, it's not just what's grown on farms. It's really everything that brings food into these national food systems. It includes, things like trade and other things as well. And of course, in all of these, policy and governance have a really strong underpinning role. And what you need to see, which I'll come to in just a bit, is the idea that policies need to be coherent. And of course, policies need to be implemented. Now, in my own research, as Subbu mentioned, we go sort of deep down to what's going on with people and communities, but we also, take a step back and say, well, what do these mean for what happens in the policy landscape? So over about 4 years ago, I started working with a very wide range of scientists across the CGIR, which is, our network of international agriculture research. And we started working on saying, well, what does transforming food systems look like in South Asia? And then we realized that the very word food system meant something very different to the agronomists, the economists, the sociologists who are looking at it, the hydrologists, and people like myself who really come more from the nutrition perspective. So one of the first things we did was try to understand what does a food system look like in local context? And these are like two just really, small pieces of data from what we piloted at the district level to look at food systems. And we made a very deliberate effort to look at it from the plate. We said, let's first look at what people are eating. Let's try to understand where their food comes from, what's then going on in agriculture, what's going on in markets, and so on and so forth. And what we found, so this is data, we piloted this in 5 districts, and would love to be able to scale some of this. But what we find is that on the left-hand side, when you look at the plate and at what foods are eaten, you're really looking at a fairly limited set of foods at the end of the day that make up the multiple meals that people eat. And it's really your cereal heavy foods, your pulses, potatoes, very prominent. And then there's a whole collection of snack foods that show up on people's plates. So that figure on the left is from Nepal. And then if you go to the right and you look at, well, where does this food actually come from? I mean, the most dominant finding from our insights is that food is coming predominantly from markets, except for the few things that the cereals that people are growing in their homes. And that means you really need to take and pay close attention to what's happening in markets that really connects what's going on in production systems. And mind you, these are all rural farming families, okay? These are not urban families. So, so I think when you take that perspective from plate to farm, take that view, that long view, the insights really force you to look at entire systems. Let me see if this is moving here. All right. We also looked in our work on why do people choose what you do? And just as we have in our various conceptual frameworks and things like that, I mean, we distilled this down to just a few foods, and we said, well, people are consuming these foods. Let's look at why they're saying they consume it. And it's that mix of, availability, accessibility, taste, and so on and so forth. And what you find, for example, if you just look at the biscuits angle, right? It's highly available, it's highly affordable. It's, it's not, people like the taste, and it's not like they don't know that some of these things are not nutritious, but they're entering people's diets for a variety of different reasons. And if we're to solve for better diets, we really have to address all of these reasons. Now, I want to hone in on the issue of cost and affordability. So this is work that, of course, at IFPRI, we have a lot of economists in our system. Derek Heddy, who Subbu, you also know, has led for a long time our work on looking at the affordability of healthy diets. And I want us to just pay attention to the fact that in this region, more than 50% of people in most of the countries we are talking about cannot afford a healthy diet. Now, the Eat Lancet also does this for the planetary, for the planetary healthy diet. I don't think the numbers are very strong. So you're really trying to look at, well, what is it that we can do in policy? What is it that we need to do to really transform just that one driver? Leave aside all of the other things on desirability and availability and all of that, right? So there's a lot of work here to be done. The way that we think about this at IFPRI in terms of how do you tackle the cost and affordability of healthy diets is we think about the need to tackle the poverty problem, the price problem, and the preference problem. And what happens is a lot of times the nutrition community focuses only on the preference problem. We think about people making choices. We think about people choosing foods. They're not choosing these foods in a vacuum. They're choosing this in a space where they're deeply affected by these other two sides of things, right? So we need to sort of in a policy frame, we need just to solve the affordability angle, we need to think about these three. So this is not even getting to solving some of the other, the other drivers of healthy diets. Now, you cannot have traveled around India and not seen, or much of South Asia, and not just seen shops where the entire facade of some of these food shops is just covered with these packages. Okay, these are, I mean, the food environment and the prominent presence of packaged ultra-processed foods that are either tailored to the Indian market, are made by the Indian market. Um, this picture, these are pictures. I have a fantastic collection of these from across my travels in the region, but they just kind of tell you what you're up against when you start to think about that intersection of price and preference in our food system. So there's a lot of work to be done on really thinking about what is that environment that shapes not just what people eat, but also what people buy. Okay. In my own work, we've done tons of work on looking at behavior change programs to strengthen healthy diets. And I gave a talk summarizing all of this at Cornell last fall. And of course, we've learned a lot about promoting dietary diversity and things like that. But it turns out that in our region in South Asia, there is very little evidence available on behavior change interventions that actually address the consumption of unhealthy foods. We've done a lot better at improving the consumption of, say, fruits and vegetables and other things. So, for researchers thinking about the future, I think there's a lot to be done on this front. So there's, some really critical evidence gaps here. The other piece that I want to sort of put in your heads is, how does food get on tables? I was glad to see in the notes that the run of agenda discussion that we were going to talk about gender. But our data needs to show us, what does this actually look like? So again, in the food systems assessment work that we did, we had a lot of economists on our team who had done a lot of work on gender and food and nutrition. And we said, well, let's just look at how gender plays out across the food system. And what we found is that food preparation tasks in all the countries where we did the surveys are done predominantly by women. Men are certainly involved in the food system, and women are working alongside with them in farms. But our data shows that, so where it's agriculture and sort of taking food to markets, men and women are both involved. But as soon as it comes into the domestic space, men are not involved at all. And I do not think it is okay for us to accept this. It is not okay that humanity is to be fed by just 50% of humanity, right? And so we really need to think about, what is that intersection between what's going on within homes on gender dynamics around food and what we meet in markets around us. Time pressure, financial pressure, these are the things that also have a very strong gendered component here, that we miss the boat if we're not going to really think about innovative solutions here. Okay, so I say, let's figure out how to get everyone involved in the act of feeding families. It's the only way some constraints are going to be blocked. So overall, just taking a look at sort of our people-focused work, and then I'll come in a minute to close up and talk about policy, is all of the work we've done on behavior change, which has cut across and behavior change and understanding diets, which has really cut across different target groups in my own work, is that we need to be really specific about the changes that are being targeted in diets, because every eating behavior that you're talking about, every choice that somebody makes about something to eat, sits at that intersection of multiple factors. It's very clear from our research, we have to go well beyond information. We have to absolutely ease the practical, the structural, the social, the community, and the food environment barriers. We have to expand both responsibilities and capabilities, because like I said, women cannot be burdened alone in this journey. We have to understand and deploy all platforms for scale and quality. So our behavior change programs today are intersecting with marketing campaigns by the producers of ultra-processed and other foods that we're just not able to, you're just not able to keep. There's some innovative things happening around that, but it's it's very challenging. And then we need to think about both financing and the enabling environments, which is going to take me to the policy side of things. We have to think about, how do you match the marketing spend or restrict the marketing spend of the foods that we want people to eat a little bit less of in our food systems. And we really need to think about enabling environments that are not just within the food system, but really hitting health, hitting all kinds of other parts of food policy. So, when I think about policy entry points for sustainable, healthy diets, which, and I'll close in just a moment, they require both policy coherence and effective policy implementation. There's a range of different policy entry points to address each of those drivers of healthy diets that I mentioned before. So there's a set of policy drivers and entry points for solving and supporting the desirability and the food preferences. There are entry points to address the affordability angle, the accessibility angle, and the availability angle. And then there's this overall sort of food-related laws and governance that need attention. It seems like a lot to get a handle on, but it's not. It isn't once you really start sort of jumping into it. There's some very new and innovative work being done by at least a few different actors in the food, land and water system space. On the left-hand side, I'm sharing here work that GAIN, the Global Alliance for Improved Nutrition, has done on a policy coherence diagnostic tool, where they look across all of those policies, entry points that I mentioned on the previous slide, and look at all the different outcomes that we want to see, and can start to bring together where are you seeing policies that are coherent, which means they point all of society in the same direction, as opposed to having clashing policies. And then on the right-hand side is work done by the Council for Energy, Environment, and Water, where they also look at it from the water, energy, and side of things, which, and I think, of course, we need to continue to bring all of these together. So, I think that, we are on the way to finding this. I worry a lot about policy implementation and financing and all of those types of things. And I worry a lot that actually the massive health system side of things and the food system side of people are not talking enough to each other. I also think how we think about food and food supply is going to make a very big difference. There's sort of this romanticization often that, if people grow it, they'll eat it, and this, that, and the other. But I just think we have to accept that people are buying food from markets. Demand is changing and demand is being shaped. And so, work that my colleagues who've been involved with Eat Lancet has done, really show that, these are sort of collections of slides that show what happens with what's happening today with supplies in terms of business as usual, in terms of production, demand, and trade. Those are the three graphs there. And what needs to happen if you think about this in the context of the Eat Lancet too. And I think, we really point to where action is going to be most needed is on those healthy foods, such as fruits and vegetables and pulses, et cetera, where we need to improve lots and lots of different things in the food system, and think about that combined effort of production systems and what happens in trade quite a bit more than for South Asia than the other foods that are coming on people's plates. So I want to close in a sense by reminding us that wherever we are, multiple components of the food system are converging on the same geographies and the same individuals, changing over time. What can we do, from where we stand in terms of looking at this world? So, research and policies and actions play a key role in shaping what's happening there. These are, all photos from exactly the same place in India in 2018. And for me, was just a great reminder to show that, when we stay people focused and really understand what's happening on the ground, without losing sight of what needs to happen in other parts of the policy and other ecosystems, I think we become good interlocutors, if you will, with the people trying to make change. And I will say this, Subbu, you mentioned, the hanging around in corridors and this, that, and the other, but I have found policymakers are really wanting to make change. They're not opposed to making change. What we need to do and what we can do is really help to identify the entry points and accelerate. And I think the years of work are, certainly playing out. I really also think that researchers have a massive role to play here. We need to continue to build the evidence at multiple scales. So, what we've done, at IFPRI, we look at evidence building in sort of 4 buckets. And the work that Eat Lancet has done has been phenomenal, I think, in clarifying the situation, the outlook, and helping us to begin to think about, the solutions and the enabling environments and the tools that we need to have looking forward. But I think of many of these things as, you bring some things together and it becomes a beginning for where you want to go next. And I think we really have to work together on where do we go next. So let me stop there, and really looking forward to the rest of this discussion and to continued collaboration really with all of you on walking this journey of evidence and policy. Thanks. And action.
Thank you so much, Purnima, and that was a very nice overview of the work that's happening. And also thank you again, Walter and Shilpa. I think like together, I feel like so much has been shared with us already. I'm sure. I just want to make one announcement that I've been prompted to make for the participants who are here with us. Please do put your questions in the Q&A box. And we will. I mean, someone is there watching those questions, and we will certainly take it up, to the best of our abilities in the remaining half an hour that we have here. So let me start by sort of first of all, just giving each of the three panelists, any chance you want to sort of first respond to each other first before I, kind of put my set of questions out. Are there any quick remarks that each of you would like to sort of just comment on what you have heard from each other?
I can go first.
Okay, Shilpa,
I've
and
been
then
really blown. Yeah, I've been blown away by Purnima's slides of how she framed it as the price problem, the preference problem, and the poverty problem. And I've seen it firsthand, working in the slums in Mumbai, trying to teach people about eating healthy, and then you're bombarded with this food environment, which is highly ultra processed, cheap. And so you're really working against the system. And I think we do need to take a holistic look at this. And I completely agree with you, Purnima, that we've been working with the state government of Tamil Nadu in trying to make change. They're actually trying to, we understand that there is an election cycle coming up, and they're trying to reduce the amount of white rice that's provided through PDS and instead provide more dal. So I think that's a huge public health win if it does get implemented. But I think looking at it at a food systems view is just so important.
Thank you, Shilpa. Walter, please.
Yes, those are really great presentations by Dr. Menon and Dr. Bupatharaju. And I do certainly especially appreciate Dr. Menon's analysis of what are the next steps, because that's sort of where we left the Eat Lancet Commission report, that we can see pretty clearly where we should be going, but how to get there is a tremendous challenge, and bringing in all those sectors is critical to that. Just one little additional word that I heard, and it addresses partly what Shilpa was saying in our Eat Lancet deliberations, was the word convenience. And that's where a lot of those prepared processed foods win. And it makes shopping and food preparation a lot more simple for people who are, there's almost everyone, overly stressed in terms of time. And I think analyzing it as Dr. Menon was doing, the motivations of why people make choices is really critical, because I think, and it is possible with semi-prepared foods that are healthy, that we can deal with some of that convenience issue along with the price issue. Just to add to what Shilpa mentioned about if someone wants to become a vegan, it doesn't mean, and they do become a vegan, it doesn't necessarily mean healthy. We can easily see that how that can be very unhealthy. And one additional way, I almost feel obligated as a physician to remind people that if you are vegan, you almost will surely become vitamin B12 deficient unless you have some supplementation or fortification, and that can be dangerous actually, and serious neurodegenerative problems can arise. There's a very simple fix. The cost of fortification or supplementation is very simple, but one of our former students, Linda Kellerman, did an analysis of Asian populations living in North America, and there was, even in this group where income wasn't so much of a problem, there was clearly a serious problem of vitamin B12 deficient in people who were vegan or getting near vegan. When you get much less than that, 2 servings a day of animal source foods, yeah, you are at quite a risk there. Again, just something to be aware of, because we definitely don't want to cause problems when we're suggesting people move toward more plant-centric diets. But again, those were really wonderful presentations.
Yeah, and Subbu, if I might,
Yeah, please,
it's
please, yes.
fantastic to have, 2 people from the medical profession here. Just to say, I think this is really where we need to move the needle. I was, had the privilege of joining, and it was nice to see you there, Subbu, the Lancet Commission on the future of India's health systems. And I think what we're looking at and if you take India, I don't think it's that the challenges that are going to face the region are not going to be that different because the health burdens are so similar. But I sort of, we cannot have a world where we're thinking about treating increasingly larger and larger and larger numbers of people with NCDs without really looking at, well, what is it that's contributing to those NCDs and how do we really connect the dots here? So, I'm hoping that in future conversations, that whole intersect of health and food system can really come together for us. But I find it also just hard to take off the gender hat, quite honestly. It's very steeped in our work, and I'm constantly thinking about how do you do these things in ways that makes it easier for women, easier for people to put healthy meals on their table it's a multiple times a day effort we're talking about, right? These are some massive challenges, societal challenges that we have to solve here. Anyway, look forward to further discussion. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much, Purnima. Again, for participants, please do put your questions and Yuvika, just let me know. So maybe I'm just going to sort of pose a sort of a question here for my own learning to Walter, Shilpa, and Purnima from their own perspectives. What is it that, I think like my take from what I've heard from the 3 presentations has been that we know a lot. And then a key challenge, which I want to sort of elaborate on as we have time, just learn from your experiences on when have things worked. When we just sort of right now, the picture seems so complex that where do we even start? But I know, for example, Walter has done a lot of work and the nutrition department at HSPH on that matter, including working with the industry. And I would love to hear his views. But before I do that, what is it that still remains to be known? Or what are the things where you would say that there is still some research or science to be focused on that we don't know that will help? And I pose this question to this rich panel in part because this is probably one of the things that EAT Commission would have focused on over their 2 reports. And of course, also Shilpa being a hardcore researcher and Purnima. So I just want to open to all the 3 panelists. What would you say are things that we don't know yet, or it would be helpful to know more? And that might be very compelling to then policymakers?
Right. So I think, from a research standpoint, we do have a lot of data from, the US and other countries, but sort of as an epidemiologist, some of those longitudinal data in India are lacking. And I think if we can find something, similar to what the cohorts are doing here, I think that would be fantastic. To your other point is, I think we really need to understand how implementation science works. How do we take what we know in science and then essentially translate that? How do we implement it? How do we really make sure that it works for policymakers? I think that is really critical.
Yeah, thank you, Shilpa. Walter?
Yeah, it would be, as Shilpa says, it would be really great if we did have a cohort in India that was analogous to what we're doing here. And it really is very helpful in knowing where we are and guiding decision makers. It's a shame to have such a large population and no cohort yet. And it takes years of follow-up, so starting sooner would be certainly best. And there's take almost every piece of the picture, and there's more detail that would be helpful to learn. For example, we know that shifting more toward whole grain products, whole grain rice in India would be tremendously important. But we have, as Shilpa knows, because she's doing a lot of the work, very active collaboration with a group in Chennai who's very well equipped and experienced doing intervention studies there of how to shift diets toward a healthier version. And some of this is trying to find out what types of rice. There are hundreds of varieties of rice in India, and they're not all the same from a health standpoint. They have different GIs, they have different whole grains composition. And so there's details like that that can be very helpful, including then preliminary processing like parboiling from what we see can be very helpful from a shelf life standpoint and GI glycemic index standpoint too. So there's details on all of these issues. And part of it on the whole grain picture, the reality is most of the evidence is coming from not whole grain rice, but from whole grain wheat products because that's where most of the work was done. So there's a lot on every aspect, but I do think the biggest issues now are in the translation area, such as what Dr. Menon is working on. And that's why in our own department, we started off pretty much pure epidemiologically, and we brought on more and more people to work on translation part, whether it's here or any place in the world. One area that I spend a lot of my time engaged in is working with the food service industry, because a high percentage of meals are eaten outside the home. And we have multiple courses with the Culinary Institute of America because it's part of it is it's the direct effects of what they serve are really important. We've had progress getting more whole grains in, getting sodium lower, so getting trans fat out by working with the food service industry. But they're also I think potentially influence people's experience and expectations, getting them familiar with healthy, sustainable foods and meals that become aspirational. And I think that's fundamental to what Dr. Menon was describing. We want people to want to have foods that are healthy, sustainable, and delicious, and they have to be delicious. And that's not going to happen without getting the food service engaged. So that's an area where I think we can work, almost anybody can start that effort rolling, whether it's their own food service in our own institution, which we've been doing at Harvard, because we learn a lot ourselves. What are the problems? Or is it your bigger institution or governmental institutions working with the food service industry and chefs they can be great allies. And the bottom line of this is optimistic. I think that there are double and triple wins here. If we do it right, we can have diets be much healthier, they can be much more sustainable, and they can actually be more delicious. And really sort of selling that whole package, I think, can be is what we really need to do.
Purnima?
Yeah, no, I think Walter and Shilpa really, covered it up. To me, the differences really between the South Asian, the ways in which South Asians eat, and perhaps the ways in which, we may eat in the West, in terms of, a lot of things that are happening in South Asia are happening in the right direction, right? People are doing more ingredients-based shopping. It is more home-based cooking and so on and so forth. The reason we see the rise across, of course, in urban cities and all of that. Now you're seeing a rise in app-based purchases and this, that, and the other, is that this is where the sort of the social and the economic are colliding, if you will, with the ways in which we want to eat as a society, and really keeping our eyes on that and doing the research. I think innovatively, but also, as lined up with the directions that some things need, like policy needs to move, for example, is going to be really important. The latest, so I really liked, Walter, the work that you mentioned, say with the Culinary Institute of America, or the other food producers. I was quite interested to see that India's last consumer survey. So there isn't sort of a real dietary survey with or a cohort study in the kind of the way that we might want, or that we have with in the US. But the National Dietary Survey shows this massive increase in consumption and purchase from online vendors and things like that. And you look at that and you say, okay, that's a massively growing business in India. Maybe that's the business community we should be working with, even more than, say, chefs and others, to look at what they can do within those ecosystems. But I mean, really, for our region, I really worry about the social side of things, because we place a huge premium on our culture, on the ways in which we eat, on the culinary traditions. But remember, those traditions are, they're really being they're sort of on the backs of women that have spent, and continue to spend enormous amounts of time to feed Indian families or South Asian families the ways in which we want to eat. And it's not clear to me how we're going to solve that. It is a very rich culture. The culinary history is phenomenal, but it's being maintained with this sort of labor of a few, if you will, that is colliding with where society itself is, moving in terms of time and money and all of that. So I think there's a huge room for R&D here across food systems. Unfortunately, that R&D is not met with financing. Okay, I mean, India's latest agricultural R&D budget is less in real terms than in previous years, in an era when we need more innovation. I don't know what the R&D budgets look like in the other countries, but how are we going to get to these cohort studies? How are we going to get to testing these interventions that need to be tested, and doing it across at the scale that needs to happen in the diversity of this region, without sort of massive R&D and innovation budgets? Like, I just don't see this. I just don't see it. Huge issues to solve here. Sorry, that was a few different angles, but I am very worried about research investments here.
No, this is no. I think, again, thank you all of you for making those remarks. I'm also sort of following some questions coming from the participants, and I will sort of frame it. I think you already touched upon one on the budget thing, since most of the folks are probably tuning in from India. Walter, I want to ask you. I'm so glad that you brought this thing about working with these other groups, and giving one example of working with the Culinary Institute, but I'm aware of other ones as well that you work to reduce sodium, for example, even in processed foods, for example, and how technology has helped there based on the science that you and others in the nutrition department have done. I want to sort of ask your thoughts, given with such a huge experience that you've had with an evolved state of research in the US. What's your experience on this idea of uh, educating the people with regards to changing diet? You know, market being markets, there are some levers we can pull and incentivize, etc. But one thing that Purnima also raised, and this also is a sort of a related question to Shilpa, I'll come to, but I want to sort of hear your experience on what you have learned from here, and that's been translated into recommendation of various forms. I don't want to get into the USDA's latest inverting the pyramid, without getting too much into it right now. We are in a kind of different phase. But broadly, what's your experience in changing people's quote unquote behavior when it comes to purchasing food? Because I want to link this to the recent trends that we have observed. For example, at least in the US, again, I'm just stating from reports, like alcohol consumption has come down. Right. So I don't know what's driving that. Now, other types of things have increased, like, the cocktail type variety, but we know that the wine industry has been coming down. I don't know what's behind it, but sometimes when, people just vote with their feet or vote with their wallet or whatever it is, um, what's your experience in terms of like that kind of education-led behavior change? Is there any potentials for that in the South Asian context, which has an additional layer of complexity, perhaps, with this very wide range of very poverty or low income issues and folks like us who are there? Thank you.
Right. Let's see. Yes, huge challenges. And of course, we're educators and we regard education as really important. And as public health people, education for the public. And our voice and our resources are very limited. So compared to Coca-Cola's budget, for example. But we can use education opportunities around us. And of course, that should start in schools, where from the time students enter, they learn about healthy eating and they experience it too. And that's why we have to combine what we serve with what we say there. The health sector is not providing the education it should. The health sector should be leaders in this, and they've been pretty much missing in action. But we are, in the last couple of years, just starting to make some real progress in there. That physicians aren't educated, and they're not going to be educators when they should be a major source of information, but they're not. And the walls of clinics, what people can see in videos or printed material while they're waiting, all that's an educational opportunity that we're not taking advantage of. Also, what I learned years ago, and it's probably shifted a bit now, but with all these influencers around, but surveys showed that what women, the food purchasers, trusted most were women's magazines in the United States, like Shape, Family Circle, those. And there are something like that in India. I don't know just how that looks today, but I always talk to those journalists and when they ask about questions, and they've been really helpful in translating because there is an interest in food for sure. And those people are influencers. And we've seen, like for trans fat elimination, they were actually a critical part of that process. When the margarine manufacturers did some surveys on people's knowledge of trans fat, the education came through, that people understood, not the majority, but enough to make market share an issue. The majority said they understood trans fat was a problem and would be avoided. And then the industry took it out of their products. So that channel is really important. We have our website. We have other kinds of more direct communication about healthy diet. We do have on our website, the Asian obesity website that Frank Hu initiated. And I think if someone goes to that, they can find out information. We have Nutrition Source, and we have our Healthy Plate in well more over 50 different languages now. So that's for some people that can be a source of information. But as I think we all understand, education is not a sufficient solution, that we do need policies that make healthy food affordable. And just to go back a step, in the Eat-Lancet Commission report, somebody raised at the beginning, well, shouldn't we make our healthy diets affordable? We took that off the table right away. We didn't want to compromise health by making it cheaper. We regard defining a healthy diet on its own merits, and then it's the role of society to make healthy diets affordable by various levers that were mentioned, sometimes subsidies, by sometimes shifting costs by taxes, and just reduction of poverty. Those are all really important roles of society to make healthy food available, affordable. And the diet we describe actually is a number of analyses that have been done. Because it's more plant-based than animal-based foods, which animal-based foods tend to be more expensive. It's less expensive than a lot of places where people are headed in terms of higher consumption of animal-sourced foods, and it's not more expensive than current national guidelines. The group at Tufts have done some analysis there, but the cheapest diet is basically refined starch and sugar, and that's not a healthy diet, as Shilpa really emphasized. So there is some cost that's real here, and we have to find a way to make that available and affordable. And again, I think as Menon mentioned, convenience is something where we can work with the food sector on that. The food sector is not monolithic, and they have. We need smart processing, not just saying no processing. Processing to preserve the healthy composition of foods that are naturally there, rather than degrade them as we've done too often, and dealing with the issue of time costs is very real, which is a gender issue. So there's a lot of partners we can work with there, and there is this inherent double win, and we need to take advantage of that. Good for environment, good for health, and it can be reasonable for the pocketbook as well. We're not talking about highly expensive foods.
I sort of, there was this one comment, I'm going to link it to like what you just laid out, Walter, and please others can chime in on the panel. How effective has labeling been? I mean, if packaged food of certain type, one form or the other, um, in fact, Walter, I know like you even work with restaurants, even on labeling like individual things that are people are ordering. That is typically not how we see labeling, but now you see the details sometime, at least in some restaurants. And I know you work with like the Harvard Dining, the whole thing, etc., which used to be. I'm so glad that you raised the issue of schools, because probably one way to look at it would be, what's done, it's harder to change, but what's coming is going to be so critical, especially for South Asia, which is still very young and growing. And so I want to sort of, if briefly, if you could comment, because of this packaged food being such a big, part of the story, including convenience, you could argue. How effective, what are your thoughts on the labeling studies, that interventions that you've been associated with as well? And Shilpa and Purnima, please also chime in. This was also something raised by the participants roughly. Thank you.
Yes, labeling is a big issue, and it can be very helpful. That it was one of the important ways that we got trans fat out of the food system, that once it was put on the label, then and there was basically sunlight, the manufacturers took it out of their products. So there's this indirect effect of labeling that can be very helpful, causing industry to shift their processing and formulation. if the public is going to be aware of what's really going on. And then there's the sort of direct effect and empowering people to make choices that are going to be healthier choices. And uh, there are some benefits there that have been documented on it. If it's just in isolation, some of the effects are fairly small, but there's research on what kind of labels and placements where they should be placed. A number of our faculty at our school and others have been doing careful research on that. And these nuances do make a difference. But in general, labeling can have some important benefits. Sodium is one big issue, it's a huge issue all over the world, and actually bigger in many parts of Asia than in the United States. And it's really hard to know what the sodium content of food is. Some of the biggest sources, bread in the United States. Most people, they don't taste it directly, and it's hard to know what's in there. I can't tell most of the time. So that is really helpful there. And some people will make choices on, again, the direct effect, but there's also this indirect effect of reformulation. And some of it is not just putting the number there, but putting make it a little warning sign, like stoplights that have been shown to be effective in some places. So we should use that. And again, it does require research to get the nuances of it, to make them as effective as possible.
I think we are right up to the time. My final question, this I'm just going to pull from the participant. If you could prioritize one change, and this is the toughest one, right? Asking researchers like us, if you could prioritize one change over the next decade to improve both the planetary and human health through food systems in South Asia, what would it be? We have about 2 to 3 minutes left. Shilpa, do you want to go first? Please.
Sure. I think promoting more plant protein and reducing consumption of refined grains is, I think, will have the greatest impact, given that intakes are so high for refined grains. Yeah.
I like that. Unlike you said, that was very clear. Thank you, Shilpa. Purnima?
Yeah, I think for me, given that the food industry and the food supply systems respond so substantially to consumers, somehow the more that we can do to really empower consumers to demand more and better from the food system through all the different ways in which they engage with the food system, all of us do, you will, really begin to see those changes. And so, at least part of that is going to be investing in, and Walter, I really liked what you said about, working with young people and sort of empowering them to, move on that journey while, really regulating as much as we can what's happening in the food system. I was on the Lancet series for adolescent nutrition, and we really honed in there on, on the power of working with young people to reshape what's going to happen, from a demand-based approach. So, I think there's just that has to be a powerful way for us to look forward. Food systems do respond to what people want, and we have to seize that power back, seize the power.
I really liked both of those responses. Shilpa put it so nicely, the diet composition. I think to be a little different, to just add to that, I think we really need to be engaging everyone in this process because there's no one single solution here. We need, this does need to be a transformation that involves all sectors of society. So working together, we definitely can make changes that will have huge benefits for human health and planetary health.
Thank you so much. This has been amazing, and I hope participant, there are so many things that all three of you have laid out. I had so many questions about the masala study. Those are for academic seminar, as well as from the commission report. But I really sort of see how all three of you have been doing like truly inspiring work in this area, and that itself, I hope, is something that folks who tuned in would take from here. And especially Walter, I think like I want to take this opportunity as a part of a sort of quote unquote a formal webinar session. You've been the sort of the longest ever time friend, philosopher, and guide to this effort on improving nutrition, and making it like in various aspects. I mean, it's infinite, and I'm so amazed that you're continuing to be active in that domain to finding ways to sort of demonstrate how this truly is such a core part. Now I cannot think of nutrition outside of public health. It's now synonymous for me. And I think that credit goes to you and, of course, a lot of the people whom you have mentored. So I just want to take this opportunity on behalf of all of us here, and I'm sure they all will agree, to sort of thank you and our gratitude for doing that, opening these avenues. Thank you so much, all of you, for taking this time to participate in this session. Thank you, Yuvika. Thank you, Angarika, for bringing us all together. And thank you once again. Purnima, get some rest. I hope you have, not a crazy day today. And thank you so much, Shilpa. We should get together for a coffee or something. I would love to sort of learn more.
Definitely.
And Walter, I
Thanks,
hope,
everyone.
I miss those days when we would constantly be talking, but I hope to see you very soon. Thank you so much, everyone. Thank you, Angarika.
Thanks,
Thank you,
everyone.
Yuvika.
Thank
Thank
you.
you, Hitesh. Yeah.
Thank
Thank you,
you.
everyone.
Thank you.